Hello. In the context of the patterns for enterprise applications, I'm going to talk about the object-relational structural patterns. As the name says about this, is there is the problems about relating the structure of objects with the structure of a relational model, because we are talking about two different paradigms. Uh, so there's a mismatch between both paradigms, the way you basically define objects and the basically define relations. For instance, in objects, you have a unique identifier for the objects. Each object has is unique identified by its address in memory, while in a relational model identification is done by keys, and these keys can be complex. So when you start having a relation between the objects in memory and the tuples in the database, you need to define how are going to relate them. And so you need to find the relation between the structures, and afterwards you need to define rules how to map objects or entities from memory to disk, and from disk to memory. So that's the goal of this pattern. And actually, the way we're going to look at it is that looking at our layers, we can see that now is basically are describing the relation between the structures here and the structures there. And actually, we are going to describe how the information goes and passes from one side to the other side, okay? So several patterns in the book describe this behavior. And the first one I want you to see, so what these object relational structure is identity field. And this idea is that now if the object is persistent, you need to have an identifier that refers as the object in the database, okay? And of course, you can decide that the identification is done using a semantic value related to the way you use it in the database. So a semantic value that actually has a meaning, like the number of citizens, or more complex, a compound identifier that relates these with other entities. But it's very difficult to manage when you come to the object side. And you have another problem, is that they are not actually really unique, because they can change. You can just have an error when you create your citizen number, and then you need to change it afterwards, okay? So the solution, and that's the solution that you observe in GPA, is that you actually have a unique identifier, an integer that is in the database. And what is described in this pattern that is how this integer or how these identifiers, so the different type of identifiers, the different strategies of identifiers, is this integer unique for all the database, or is it unique per table, for instance? Is something that you can discuss in terms of this identifier. And actually these strategies can be defined in the GPA, when you define if it is when you define that you have a unique identifier in GPA, you can say what is the strategy associated with it. Okay. Another relevant decision you need to make when you implement the identity field is how do you generate new identifiers? And this is relevant because, look, they are unique and they are so shared. So when you try to get a new identifier inside your business transaction, you need to do a read, and you need to guarantee that it is actually unique. So you need to lock, and afterwards this can be a real bottleneck. So the generation of unique identifiers is a concurrency problem, and actually the one of the solutions you can use is to have these identifiers in a different table, and you have a transaction to get the identifier. You will find other solutions, but a transaction that is different from your business transaction. So before you start your business transaction, you have a very short transaction where you get this identifier. And afterwards, you use this identifier in your transaction. The only problem that can occur is that if this transaction aborts, then basically you generate an identifier that you're not going to use, which actually is not a big problem. So what can happen is you're going to find in your identifier that, well, there's no entity with identifier 5, okay? Because basically when you try to use the 5 identifier, it's just aborted, and then this transaction where you get identifier, you already use it, right? So the transaction committed, so basically the identifier is lost, but it's not a big deal.